Yay! Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode with me, Emma Desi, and my lovely guest, Janyre Tromp, who is going to be talking about her book, her new book today, Darkness Calls the Tiger. But first, let me just tell you a little bit about Janyre. She is an award-winning and best-selling writer and editor with a deep love for all of history. If she isn't editing or reading, most of the time you'll find her writing mid-20th century historical novels with a healthy dose of deliciously creepy suspense. But she's also a mum, a wife, an award-winning editor, and a wrangler of all things who hunts for beauty even when it isn't pretty. Her books include Darkness Calls the Tiger, Shadows in the Mind's Eye, O Little Town, and Lovely Life. And so welcome, Janyre. It's so very, very lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Emma. It's so good to be on with you again. I've missed you.
I know it's been a little while, hasn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's lovely to see your smiley face. Um, for those of you who haven't caught us chatting before and perhaps don't know you, I wonder if you just share a little bit about yourself and how you got to editing and writing and what you're doing.
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, kind of heading into this, I am an author and an editor, which I'm told is kind of like a rainbow unicorn, um, in that most editors don't have the story ideas, and then most authors don't have that ability to kind of dig in to other people's work and kind of pull out the pieces and examine it all in one place. So I'm a little bit of a rainbow unicorn in that way. But I don't see myself, I don't see them differently. I guess. So I see it as story and helping, and the editing side is like helping people bring their stories to life. And then I just bring my own stories to life too. Um, so I get to do both sides, which is kind of fantastic. So I kind of fell into the English side of the world kind of by accident. I actually started college or uni as a chemistry major.
Ah, I did not know that.
So I know little known facts about me, which I was very good at it, but I hated it. I hated it. So I called my mom one day and I was in tears, and I was 17 at the time. I was young in college, and called my mom, and I'm like, what am I going to do? And she said, well, just do what you love for a little bit. And I, in all of my 17-year-old wisdom, said to my mother, and I quote, nobody gets paid to read, Mom. And of course, the great irony is that my day job, I get to read. And so as I was working, my boss at the time said to me, you should try writing your own stories. I think you've got it in you. Um, and so I did because
Why not?
what does one do? And my mom says that I have always told stories. But I never had that hankering to write them down until my boss said, you should try this. And now I'm kind of hooked.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing how our true kind of passion, calling, whatever you want to call it, can come out of left field? And it sometimes it does take a third party to say, just to notice you've got a skill or an ability that you didn't know you had.
Ex-
Yeah.
Exactly. Especially, I think, culturally, at least here in the States, culturally, the arts aren't, how do I want to say this? People are always like, oh, we have a backup job. Oh, well, you could do that as a hobby, or, so it's not necessarily looked down upon, but it's not considered a career, a
Yeah.
viable career. And so I don't think it necessarily pops into the minds of kids to do that.
No, not everybody. That's right, and it's the same here in the UK. And I think I think I've been lucky in that respect. Both my parents were artistic and involved in the arts. So whilst it was like you go and you get a job, you get your education and all the rest of it, I was luckily encouraged to do all of those things from a young age. But I know from talking to people my audience, that is not always the case. And so, how lucky at that young age, first of all, your mum to say, listen, take the pressure off, go and do something that you love for a while. And then to have that boss say, you're good at this, give it a go. And so you did. And so here you are, you're editing, you're writing. When I was sort of looking into your background a little bit more, and I was looking at your website, which is called Beautiful Ugly Me. And I was very curious. I don't think I've asked you before, why did you call it that?
So I think part of who I am, um, I, people look at me now and they see joy, and they see this contentment, and they just kind of assume that that's just who I am. Um, and they would be wrong. Honestly, they would be wrong. I think people see me now and think my life has always been easy, and they would be wrong. Without getting into a lot of detail. And I actually mention it in my debut, Shadows in the Mind's Eye, in the back of this book. There's a little snippet of where the story came from. And I have childhood trauma in my background. And then it's kind of ironic because I chose that title before my daughter got sick. But it cemented a perspective that I had already chosen for my life. And that is to find beauty and to hunt for beauty, even in those places that aren't pretty. Because I strongly believe that our world, um, we're going to experience hardships, and we're going to have hard times. It just is.
Mhm.
You cannot escape it. And the only thing that you can change about it is your perspective about it. And that's the only thing you can control. And so if you go into it looking for that awfulness, that's what you're going to find. But if you go into it looking for the beauty that is there, that is what you're going to find. And that's a scientific fact. They've done neuroscience studies on how if you approach life from a positive aspect, and that's not a Pollyanna skipping through the tulips, la-di-da. And there are moments where it sucks. And it's okay to go, you know what? It isn't okay right now. I am not fine right now. Because that's true life. Um, but if your overall focus is, hey, we're gonna be okay. We're gonna come out on the other side of this. I'm gonna find good in this. Then you find it. And I say that with the background of, we almost lost my daughter. I mean, she almost died multiple times. She was in and out of the hospital. Doctors made mistakes. Um, she had a burst appendix for 36 hours. Um, she should have died.
Yeah.
And that was the first time she was in the hospital. And so, it was a harrowing time. And I will be honest that there was a point in time in there where I lost all faith. I did not see how I was going to take one more step.
Mhm.
And it was the third time my daughter was hospitalized. And um, she had called me up to her room, and she was in tears because she knew we were going to have to go to the hospital again. And I, d- I didn't know. I didn't know how we were going to do it. You know what I mean? And we did. After that third time, there were three more times that she was actually hospitalized. There were a myriad of other times that we were in the ER where she wasn't actually admitted. Um, and so it was a long, long, long journey, but I'm here. And my daughter, who was the first time she came out of the hospital, actually the first couple times, she came out with a walker because she couldn't move from the bed to the toilet on her own. I was literally carrying her for some of it. And she's in college, and she is an exercise science major. She can bench lift my weight. So
Wow.
she is tough as nails. And you know what? Even if she hadn't survived, there would have been something else too. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so that perspective is where that title, Beautiful Ugly Me, comes from. It's that um, even though there is this ugliness, there is this beauty, and it's all contained inside who we are and who I am. And then my goal is to take these hard stories that are in history, um, and tell them in a way where on the other side you're like, hey, there is hope there. There is light there. And even though we went through this really dark, really suspenseful, because I love suspense. I can't not do suspense. I mean, my Christmas novella had a bomb go off in it. Because true story, the Japanese during World War II bombed Michigan, which is in the middle of the United States.
Wow,
True story.
I didn't
There,
know that.
yeah, the bomb landed about 10 minutes from my house. And the balloon that carried it is housed in a little tiny local museum about a mile from
Wow.
me. Yeah.
Wow. Well, first of all, just let me say, I'm so glad your daughter is bench pressing you.
I know, right?
Yeah, and the title then, Beautiful Ugly Me, really does embody so much of what you've been through and your daughter's been through. So I'm
Yep.
so pleased for that. Um, and then this love of history and this love of suspense that you've got, it's particularly 20th century history that you enjoy. Is that right?
I love all of history.
Okay.
But the traditional publishers make you pick. They kind of make you pick. And so my first few, well, I have a novella in there. Lovely Life is actually Vietnam era, but most of what has been published to this point is World War II. But World War II is one of those eras that even though I have a deep abiding love for it, there's a lot of books already on the market in that area. And so my first book was about a guy who came back from the Pacific with PTSD. And then the second book actually takes place in the China, Burma, India theater, which is a Pacific theater. And then I was kind of out of ideas for really unique things to do during the World War II period. And for those of you who out there who don't know, we don't always get to choose what we write. Um,
Okay, so that's
if you're
interesting and good information for people.
right, if you're traditionally published, I literally sent 3 pages of ideas, like little couple sentences of ideas to my agent, and she said, "None of those, keep going." And I'm like, "Okay." Right?
Wow.
Um, I have one that I just finished and turned into her that is in the 1960s, which in the States was a very tumultuous time.
Mm.
And most familiar to folks is the laws that came out about the race laws.
Mhm.
Finally, some decent legislation to help protect people of color in my country. And then the others that most people are not as familiar with are child protection laws, and then laws to protect those in mental institutions.
Oh.
And
So
so
this is
during
the
that
one
time,
that you've submitted.
yep,
Um,
yep,
okay, so
yep,
that's coming up. Well, tell
yes,
us about that later. First of all, I'd
yes,
love to talk to you about your
Burma.
latest release, which is not, it's only been out a few weeks. So tell us all about it.
Yeah, so Darkness Calls the Tiger. That is my World War II Burma book. And that one, I'm so excited. This was actually the first book I ever wrote. Again, a lot of times we don't have control over what sells and what doesn't sell to traditional publishers. And a lot of times it's just based on what the market will and will not be interested in at a particular
Mhm.
time. And so things come around, topics come around. And so, as I mentioned, World War II is kind of a full genre. And then there were a couple of books that were coming out by major authors that were Pacific, set in the Pacific era, or the area. And so I had released Shadows in the Mind's Eye. And my publisher was looking for the next book. And I said, well, you do realize that the one that you turned down like 3 years ago that you all loved and said you couldn't sell, yeah, you might want to reconsider that one because of everything that's coming out and releasing in the Pacific. The interest in that area is moving up.
Mhm.
Um, and they were like, you know what, you're right, let's do it. And so Darkness Calls the Tiger, it's World War II Burma. It's the China-Burma-India theater. And Burma, most people don't know that Burma is the mountains in Burma are what prevented the Japanese from taking over all of mainland Asia. And there was the mountain people in that area worked together with the British and the Americans, and specifically the Americans would just drop in officers and they would recruit mountain people. And they put together this group called the Ketchian Rangers. And the Ketchian Rangers are widely acknowledged as the genesis for the Green Berets, which is one of our major special forces here in the States. And so it's this whole very dark because the Japanese, I mean, I think widely Imperial Japan is acknowledged that it was ugly, and war is ugly, but there are certain time periods in war where it's uglier than others, and this happens to be a particularly difficult time and area. And what happens, there were actually a lot of missionaries in the mountains from the States and from Ireland randomly. There was a guy named Father Stewart. If you want to read about an interesting character, look up Father Stewart. He was Irish in the mountains of Burma during that time period, and he was crazy cool. But anyway, I digress. So these missionaries were the only contact that the mountain people had with outside people groups. And the mountain people allied themselves with the allies because of the missionaries.
Oh,
Who
okay.
would have thunk? And so, but then I got to thinking, well, what did the missionaries think when the Japanese came in and destroyed everything they knew
Mhm.
in such brutal ways? And so it's the story of one of the missionaries' daughters. She's 20 and watching everything, and she is ticked off when everything comes through. She is angry and she dives into revenge. And there's a legend in the mountains about tiger men, and it's all across the Himalayan mountains. Every people group in the Himalayas have a legend of tiger men, of these people that either actually become tigers or they take on the persona of tigers, and they're very angry, vengeful persons. And she takes on that persona and it becomes her code name. It's Shara is the word tiger in Kitchen. So she takes on this persona of Shara and becomes this very dangerous soldier.
Assassin, sounds like.
Basically,
Yeah.
yes. And then it's her, so that is the first part of the book. And then the second part of her book is her redemption out of that.
Okay. Oh, wow. So good, strong female protagonist going on.
Very
Yeah.
strong.
So really interesting topic. And I think it is a fascinating theatre of war because for us in the West anyway, it's very alien, particularly at that time, but also just the climate and the land mass that you've got to the disease, the food, everything is just so kind of alien at that time. But funnily enough, actually, I was been in touch with somebody whose ancestor was one of those missionaries. So that's really interesting. He's trying to write the sort of memoir of that ancestor, which is fabulous. But so for him, that guy that I was talking to, I can see how he came to know about this and the understanding of it. But how did it come to you? How did you find what was the seed of that story and the inspiration behind it?
Right. So interestingly enough, my roommate in college, we've talked a lot about my college career, which doesn't usually happen, but interestingly enough, my roommate in college was from India. She was from the mountains of India. And so if you know a little bit about the geography, and I'm not going to be able to do it right because I'm on screen and everything is backward, but you know, Burma is kind of here, China is kind of here, and India is over here. And so India shares a mountain range with Burma. And so my roommate lived in those mountains and I went home with her
Oh, wow.
between my junior and senior years, junior and senior, sophomore. At some point, I went home with her. That was a long time ago, y'all. Ouch.
So you
Um,
got to see that region firsthand, and
So I did. So I kind of fell in love with it. And I was trying to find ideas because again, authors are always looking for ideas, mining for ideas. And my mom said something along the lines of that she knew somebody that had left India because of the war. And I was like, Psh, Mom, what are you talking about? World War II wasn't being fought in India. Again, you'd think that by now I would just learn to listen to my mom.
She's a wise woman.
Fortunately, I have probably learned that lesson, maybe. But I found out that yes, indeed, it was there. And so the guy that she knew that had been in India put me in touch with a family who had been in Burma during that time period. And then one of the guys, that family is still in the general vicinity. I can't say where for their safety, but one of the guys that works with them actually read the book for me. And he and I talked about a lot of the detail of what was happening in the area during the time. And now the states actually where I live has a large Chechen population, refugee population. And so I got to sit down with some of them. So it was just like this whole like interesting little bits and snippets. And then so from the Morse brothers, so they're actually relatives of the guy who created Morse code.
Ah.
Right. So they actually have a couple of books out about their time in China and then in the mountains of Burma. They were in a slightly different area than what I chose to write about. But so their stories had a lot of influence on what happened in Darkness Calls the Tiger.
Wow. Oh,
So
it
it's
sounds
fun
fascinating.
journey.
Yeah. And it's interesting as well. I'm glad I asked that question because I think when I talk to a lot of newer writers about, the ideas for the book, why the book's important, what's drawn them to it, why do they want to spend years writing this book? I think people often think the idea came to them in the spur of the moment and it just happened. But actually, I think you've exemplified there the stories that we really care about and we're willing to spend that time on. They come to us often in bits and pieces. And
Mhm.
actually, it's an accumulation of things we've been interested in, little bits of information we've gathered over the years that
Mhm.
eventually hit that tipping point, and then we go, oh, I've got this great idea, and then we go and write it.
Exactly, exactly. So I have a whole file of random story bits, places that interest me, people that interest me, little random stories. I actually just added one because somebody mentioned at some point in some of my research, I ran across this guy in the 1970s who hijacked a plane. This is true story. Hijacked a plane in Northern California, stole everybody's stuff, then parachuted out of the plane, and they never found him.
I've
They got
never
away with
found
it.
him.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
I
very
was like, "Wait,
Bond-esque, isn't it? It's like,
what? How does this happen?" I have no idea if it will become a story, but,
yeah,
who
it's
knows?
got
I
the
dropped it
suspense
in.
element that you love.
Ex
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Oh, wow. So, Darkness Calls the Tiger, it's a historical novel. We've got a very strong female protagonist in there. So I'm just wondering, if you were, because we've got writers listening to this, thinking about comparative titles, if you read what, you would like, Darkness Calls the Tiger. So I wonder
Mhm.
if you can give our listeners a feel for um the kind of story it might be, and if they've read something else, what they might, if they'd like this one.
Right? So I often say it's a little bit Poisonwood Bible, which is Barbara Kingsolver, which is a really big reach, but it has a very similar vibe to it. And then I love Tosca Lee and Marcus Brotherton's Long March Home, which that's a male protagonist, but has a lot of the same similar themes. And she actually endorsed my book, endorsed Darkness Calls the Tiger, which was like, oh my gosh, do you
Yeah.
like my book? One of those moments where like I was stunned speechless that she agreed to read it and then stunned speechless again when she actually endorsed it. Which by the way, if you are an author out there, I often tell people to take a deep breath, pull up your big girl panties, and just ask. Because so many authors, if they have the time, they're willing to help. They're willing to reach out and help you because they've been where you are too.
Mhm.
Um, and big name authors don't often have a ton of time, but you never know what happens. Um, and then I would say it just is a very similar feel to, if you like the Jungle Book too. I mean,
Ah,
read your
nice.
teaching, which if you've actually read, not the Disneyfied version of the Jungle Book, but the real Kipling
Rudyard. Yeah.
book is pretty dark. And then of course MMK, who is kind of a classic writer of the India area in a
Mhm.
much earlier time frame, but
Yeah. Oh,
kind of
really good, varied sources there. So that's wonderful. That'll appeal to a lot of people. I'm very, and I don't know if you have a copy there with you because the cover is beautiful.
I don't because it doesn't release quite yet. But it is coming very soon and it's out on pre-order. I'm gonna see if I can I don't know if it'll show up with my phone or not, but yeah, so it is coming. I am super excited for it. I can't spell with my big fat thumbs. Does anybody else have this problem?
Yes, I can never press the space bar on mine.
Right? The space bar, the big one. We can't
Well,
hit
the
the
one on
big
my
one.
phone. Yeah, I don't know. I
Oh,
always miss
yeah.
it.
Yeah. But let's see. Does that
Oh,
show?
yeah, it does. Darkness calls the tiger. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as I said, that Kylan, who is my main character, she kind of embodies that tiger. And so this cover, that is Kylan.
Yeah.
Just the anger that she has. And I should say there's a male hero hair, the hero heroine pair. And he's such a nice man. That puts so much.
I guess someone
And
to
yet
sort of balance out her rage and her anger.
exactly. And he is he's described as they call him the Bear of Burma is kind of his nickname, and Bear is his code name when he's been brought as a US soldier. But he's kind of this bumbling character who, God bless him, everybody likes him, but you're just a little like, Brian, we love you. And but he also learns things as well throughout the book, and he's a nice foil to her anger and her seriousness for sure.
Oh, I can't wait to read it. I cannot wait to read it. Yeah, especially as I'm born in the year of the tiger, so I feel I'm going to resonate with her. It's good.
Yes. See, I was born in the year of the dragon, so I
Oh,
still feel I still feel her because I have that. I was actually born in the year of the fire dragon.
oh gosh.
I am very intense.
Yeah, this is a side of you I have not seen yet.
Like I said, most people see me as joyful and but it is not, it is a choice for me.
Mhm. Oh my God, that's so funny. That's so funny.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Well, thank you for sharing about that with us. And just do you know off the top of your head when it is being released?
May. So
May.
it's a little ways out, but it is up for pre-order. So
Fab, fab. Well, I'll be putting the link for pre-order and making sure everybody gets a copy ready for summer reading. Will be perfect.
I know, right?
So just quickly before we scoot off, I do want to just ask you, you mentioned very briefly about the new proposal that you've put into your agent. So I'd really love to know just a little bit about that process and a little bit about the story if you're willing to share.
Absolutely.
So you have an idea and you take it to your agent and she says, yes, no,
Mm,
maybe.
maybe. This one, honestly, she was maybe about it when I told her about it, and I'm like, "I really wanna write this one. I have to get it out of my head before I can do the next one," which she was super excited about. And it is, the deinstitutionalization of the mental institutions during the 1960s, and it takes place in my home state of Michigan. Up north in Michigan, it's this other world, gorgeous, gorgeous other world. And it's about two sisters. Um, and it's three timelines, three time frames, all the two sisters. And It is about um, their working through their childhood abuse, um, and how that affects them. And of course, in the 1960s, there's finally laws in place to protect them, but it's kind of too late.
Mm.
And the one sister is accused of murder, and the other sister is sent away into a mental institution. And the one sister that's accused of murder is trying to protect her niece from being sent into the institution as well. But
Gosh.
she's been accused of murder, so she's has very little control over her life.
Wow. Oh, that's going to be. Have you just started it now? Are you writing it now? Or are you still researching?
Nope, that one is done. I just turned in the proposal and the complete manuscript to my agent. So,
Gosh, that sounds like a heavy sort of time to kind of get into. You're a bit like, I didn't realize your stories were so dark. I don't know why, but you're
yeah,
like me. It would seem to be drawn to the darker side of life for whatever reason. Yeah.
yep. So this one actually, what I loved about this one, is that there is so in northern Michigan, there's a lot of old growth forests, and there was a lot of forest cut down when the Chicago fire happened. All of the wood to rebuild Chicago came from Michigan. Um, and there's been a lot of research on what happens to old growth forests when there's been cutting like that. And there's a lot of oak up in that area. And so one of the characters is an oak tree.
Oh, interesting.
So the Celts have a lot of mythology about the tree of life. And so that tree becomes kind of a character inside the book to help protect the one sister who's been accused of murder.
Oh, gosh, you go to some interesting places with your stories. Wow. Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay,
Random little bits. We talked about random bits that end up being in your story. So that story actually started because here in Michigan, we have these things, they're called shoe trees, and it's not the little thing that's by your door that you put a shoe on. They're literally these big trees that people have thrown shoes up into them. They're very creepy. And the first one that I saw, I was like, what is that? And it's super creepy. And I looked it up, and nobody seems to know where they originated. And it was either, it's everything from, oh, give a shoe, take a shoe, kind of from the Depression era, to it was a mass murderer who the shoes were like trophies for him. And like everything in between. And I was like, oh, fantastic. Bless my little writer's heart. What I want with this shoe tree. And that is the tree character. Um, and yeah, so you have to eventually read the story
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
to find out how all that ties in. But yeah.
Wow. And so, if just quickly, I'm just curious about your own writing process. It's something I'm always fascinated by other people, and I know newer writers coming through are always interested in how more established writers have their process. So, do you find you're quite a few books in now. You're very well experienced now. Do you find you can write quite quickly, and you can get a book down in a few months, or do you find that it's a slower process for you? Do you plan? Do you pants? How's it for you?
So I take forever to write books. Partly because I mean I have a day job and I have kids. And so I don't have the luxury of sitting down and writing for 20 hours, even 20 hours in a week. Um, and so my process, I actually in the how we met everybody is through a book we were putting together for authors. And one of the other guys that was in the book with me described my process and finally gave me a name for it. I was so excited. I am a puzzler. I am neither a pantser nor a plotter. I am kind of something in between. And I used to call myself, what was it, a planter or something? And it didn't really fit what I do. And so I'm very character driven. And so I'll get this little nugget of an idea, like the shoe tree. And then I have these images, and I had an immediate image of a woman accused of murder, and the shoes playing a big part in what was going on for her. and so that is where that whole story started. And so I start with the characters, and I dig deep into those characters, and I often have scenes that pop into my head. And so, I start working a little bit like on a plot idea. And so I use kind of a mashup of the snowflake method, which if you guys are interested in that, there's a book, but you can also look online. And I use that to start my plot. And it starts like with a sentence, like, what is your book about? And I'm like, it's about a woman accused of murder and her sister who was sent away into a mental institution because, why not? I wanted to write a book about that. Like there's reasons behind that too that I won't get into, but I was like, okay, so there we go. So that's like the basic what my book is about. And then I kind of build from there. I do a paragraph that kind of has the plot structure to it. So I have a very, very, very loose idea of what's going to happen in the book. And then I delve into characters and I dig in and I ask all kinds of questions of them. And I create what I call a character Bible. And so it has, their name, obviously, the character's name, any nicknames, when they were born, who their parents were, and other important dates. So like in this case, I had things like when my main character went away to college, when one of the guys in their lives that intersect with the two sisters, when he came and left and was back. And so like all of that is in the character Bible, but then I use the Enneagram, and I give them an Enneagram number. And I use what is an adjective and a noun to describe each of my characters. And so it might be the prodigal son, or the lost rebel. Or I'm just thinking of all negative ones right now. I can't think of the ones from this book off the top of my head. Sorry. But so then I use those to kind of flesh out who this person is and how they operate inside the book. And then I write their dark moment story. Like, what is the moment that was the pivotal moment for them? That moment that broke them. And sometimes it's not the actual really hard moment, it's a moment later. Like it's their reaction to what happened is often the actual pivotal moment. Um, and then that ends up being a big part of the backstory for my characters. And as I'm doing all of this, by the way, random scenes come into my mind. I have no idea where they belong. I just know that they're there. And so I write them down. There's an app here in the States called Cocoon Weaver. Cocoon, like, a chrysalis but Cocoon. Cocoon Weaver is free here in the States, and it's transcription software. So it's voice to text, but it keeps your audio because we all know that voice to text does weird stuff. It just does. Like, you're like, I did not say that. I 100% guarantee you I did not say whatever that mumbo jumbo is, right? So then you can go back to the recording and go, oh, that's what I said, and you can fix it. It's fantastic. I also have, it's called Aqua Notes, which we can get here in the States on Amazon, and it's shower paper. It's waterproof paper that you can keep in your shower or your bath, and their little catchphrase is no more good ideas down the drain, which I think is fantastic. And so a lot of times little random bits of scenes will show up in my brain in my shower. I know TMI, but
Yeah. No, but I think it's so true, isn't it? That is where a lot when people are just not thinking about it in those quiet moments. Oh, and it's perfect.
there's actually science behind why that happens. If you haven't figured it out yet, even though I didn't graduate as a chemistry major, I'm still a science geek. So I have all of these random bits of science in my head. But there's good reason that, like, as you're falling asleep is another time. So have a little pad of paper And I'm married, so my husband, doesn't like to be woken up by a little light clicking on so I can scribble in my notebook. So they're engineering pens. So this isn't one, but they're pens that have a little flashlight on the end here. And when you click it once, the little pen comes out and a little light comes on so you can write and see what you're doing without waking up the person next to you.
I've
It's
seen theatre
fantastic.
reviewers using those,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, and you can get ones that I think they're for pilots that I have the light is red, so it's not quite as glaring, but I already had my other one. So I'm cheap and didn't get another one. But so there's all kinds of things that way. But then by the time I kind of like hit this critical mass where I'm like, okay, now I need to start writing the book. And then I start writing the book. And I have all of these pieces. And that's why it's called a puzzler, because you have these puzzle pieces and you have this basic idea from the puzzle box, aka my paragraph summary. And I just start putting it together and I start pulling pieces in and shaping it into what I need and want it to be.
Mhm, mhm.
And then I write to about the halfway to the 3/4 mark. And then I know all of the things I've done wrong and need to be fixed, and that all of these things that I need for the end,
Uh-huh.
because I don't always know my ending. As a
Interesting.
suspense writer, that's really hard because then you end up with a lot of threads to fix.
Mhm.
But at that 3/4 mark is when I go back and I fix those to make sure it's going to work.
Interesting, interesting. Because I always recommend people go to the end, right to the end first, because
Yep.
so that they know how it's going to end, and then they know what they need at the beginning. But you know about that like 3/4 the way through.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. But part of that, I think, is also my editor background.
Right, of
I
course.
have a lot of experience looking at a book and picking apart the plot. And I can do it just from a chapter summary a lot of times. I just from 2 to 3 sentences for every chapter, I can go through and say, this is going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem. What about that? Um, and so I think that's part of it.
Mhm,
But I've also heard other authors going, yeah, I do that and that works for me too.
mhm,
So I encourage you to maybe the first time push through to the end to see if that works for you, because really that is finishing is super important and it's really, really, really hard. That last little bit is hard. So I actually use NaNoWriMo in November. If you don't know what NaNoWriMo is, it's National Novel Writing Month. Um, and so November, for the month of November, people try to write 50,000 words. And technically you're supposed to start a book
mhm.
and finish it in 30 days or however many days are in November. I can't do that. That makes a mess for me. I did it once and I will never ever do it again. But I will tell you what, it's an excellent way to finish a book.
Good idea.
Make
Yeah.
make yourself push through to the end. And I found that to be a very effective way to kind of push through that
Yeah.
the last quarter of the book feels so hard
It
sometimes.
is so hard sometimes because then that is where you realize you've missed out a lot of things or certain things don't make sense. But I'm glad you've made that sort of point, I think, particularly for newer writers who are doing their first or second book, to go to the ends, because we practice starting millions of books, but we rarely practice finishing them. And it's such a important part, not just of the writing, but of also what's going on in your head and your self-belief that you can do it, and
Yes.
how amazing will you feel even if you finish a very awful first draft? You've done it, and that might be the first time. So that's so, so important.
Yep.
Janyre, I am conscious of time. I know that you've got to rush off, but I want to say thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks for sharing about your new book, Darkness Calls the Tiger. I can't wait to get my copy delivered to me. And thanks also for sharing about your process as well, because I think it's really useful for newer writers coming along to see that there's no one way of doing it. You just got to find what works for you. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. Thanks, guys.